Coming up on the Daily with me, Niall Paterson, weight loss drugs could see obesity starting to decline in the country for the first time ever. But is it only the wealthier who are actually getting healthier? Find out in just a sec. Right, let's be honest, it is around this time of year that many of us start to think about shedding a few pounds, myself very obviously included before my nearest and dearest decide to email in. But there are those for whom their obesity is an all-year-round concern. And, if they haven't already, many of them will have started to think about the weight loss drugs that have recently exploded in popularity. And here's the thing, whilst more and more people are seeing significant weight loss as a result of taking these drugs, the majority is being prescribed privately. Now, I'm going to be speaking to an obesity campaigner who herself has taken these drugs. Sarah is going to be here just a little later. But our science and medical correspondent Thomas Moore joins me in the studio. Thomas, look, we have spoken about these drugs on the podcast previously. Since then, the number using them has skyrocketed. And you've seen the proof of that with your own eyes.
There is no better way of understanding the scale of obesity drugs in this country than going into a warehouse that's supplying them. And we went to Simple Online Pharmacy. They're in the suburbs of Glasgow, and they are one of the biggest retailers of these drugs online. They are shipping them to 400 patients every hour.
Sorry, say that again.
Yeah, 400 patients every hour. They reckon they've dealt with 200,000 patients up till now. So it's a really good way of understanding what's going on in the market, how much weight people are losing. Together, 600 tons of weight their patients have lost. That's the equivalent of 400 family cars.
So what does it look like inside this warehouse?
It looks like a regular warehouse, but they've learned from Amazon, because they're dealing with so many people. They've really got to sharpen up the logistics. So they've divided the room into two. One half is just dealing with weight loss drugs. The other half was all the other medications that an online pharmacy would deal with. And they have a walk-in fridge. I mean, I kid you not. You actually open the door, you walk in, and we were in there while there were two people restocking these shelves, which go from floor to ceiling right the way round. And that was to last the orders for just a few days. It is quite extraordinary how many of these drugs they're shipping out.
I can't quite believe it. Half the warehouse devoted to one drug, and the other half devoted to the rest of the medicines that they're shipping out. Can we put a figure on it? Like, as of this moment, how many people are taking weight loss drugs in this country?
They have access to the data, the wholesale data for all pharmacies. So they know that there are roughly 500,000 people taking these drugs.
In percentage terms, how much weight are people losing?
That's hard to say, because it depends on their height, and that's how BMI works. But they are losing a significant amount of weight. And we know from these drugs that you're losing between 15 and 20% of your body weight over a matter of months. And that's why people are desperate to get a hold on these drugs, because they've tried the shake diets, the cabbage diet, and it doesn't really work. But these drugs really do turn things around very quickly.
Yeah, got to say, tried the cabbage diet, didn't work for me for a variety of reasons, which we won't go into. But in terms of the trends that we are seeing, clearly more and more people are taking it. I mean, where do we expect this to end up? How many people might end up taking this?
If 500,000 people are taking it for 6 months at a time, you can see that by the end of this year, that would be 1 million people who've not only taken it for 6 months and reverse their obesity. What impact is that going to have on a population scale? And interestingly, they are talking about possible that we've reached peak obesity, and that we may be on the downward curve now by the end of the year, making a significant impact on the obesity rates in the UK.
When has that ever happened?
It hasn't. I mean, obesity rates have been climbing year on year since, the 1970s, something like that. They really begin to take off, partly because food became more industrialised and more tempting. They created food with a bliss point in our brains, that mixture of fat and sugar that people crave. And,
not cabbage. Not in cabbage.
Not cabbage. No, but the thing is that with these drugs, it switches off that craving. It makes you feel fuller, and that's why these drugs are having such a potent effect.
Can anyone take this?
So these are restricted to those with obesity, those with a BMI, a body mass index over 30, and you won't get it prescribed for below that. Even online, they are certainly Simple Online Pharmacy are very strict that you have to upload photos and that kind of stuff to prove that you are obese, because it does have potential side effects.
Go on.
What you can cause nausea and vomiting in about 1 in 5 people, particularly if you start with a high dose straight away. So it needs to be low dose and slowly build up. It can cause pancreatitis, which is inflammation of the pancreas, and that can be quite serious. So you need to make sure that the benefits outweigh the risks. And for somebody who is obese, who's at risk of 200 different diseases, and many of those are life-threatening, there are clear benefits to taking this drug.
Are the manufacturers able to keep up with what seems to be pretty consistent and increasing demand?
That was one of the questions I asked when I was there, because at first there were big problems with supply of Wegovy, and at that time Ozempic too, because that was the version of Wegovy that was being given to people with diabetes, but it was kind of being sidetracked and being given to people with obesity as well, and that was creating all kinds of problems to people getting a supply if they had, clearly a major medical problem in diabetes. But the supply problems have been resolved, and there is this other drug, Mounjaro, which has come on stream now, which is even more effective than Wegovy, and between the two of them, they've really ramped up supply. So this pharmacy was getting 4 truckloads of these drugs delivered daily.
Ozempic, the brand name, has kind of almost become a shorthand for these weight loss drugs, but it's not a very useful way of describing them. What are they?
Yeah, so Ozempic is for people with type 2 diabetes.
Yeah.
The same ingredient, semaglutide, is marketed as Wegovy for people with obesity. Now, that mimics a hormone released in the gut that goes up to the brain that tells the body that you're full, you've had enough, so you stop eating. So people who take Wegovy feel fuller, faster, and for longer. They lose around 15% of their body weight in a matter of months. Now, there's this newer drug called Mounjaro, which mimics 2 hormones in the body. It's more effective, so you will lose around 20% of your body weight in a matter of months.
But of course, in this country, there are 2 avenues you can go down in terms of your healthcare. You can go through the health service, or you can go private. Where are the weight loss drugs going to?
So 95% of people taking these drugs in the UK are doing so through private means.
Why is that? Is that because the NHS won't give them out?
The NHS does not have the resources, the money or the personnel to deliver this kind of medication. For years, obesity has been a small clinic at the back room of a hospital somewhere in the region. People have really struggled to get care in hospital, and that was the only means for giving out Wegovy. And when we did some research on this earlier in the year, we found that only 6% of the patients who were supposed to be getting Wegovy were actually getting it. I mean, it's quite mind-numbing. And even with Mounjaro, the newer drug, when it was released at Christmas, just before Christmas, they said that only 200,000 patients out of the 3.5 million who actually qualify for treatment would get it in the first 3 years of the rollout.
And it all just boils down to cost. How much is, on average, a monthly cost for this sort of
stuff? So a private patient is going to be paying roughly £150 a month.
Isn't that quite affordable over the course of a month, particularly if your shopping bill is going to be coming down significantly as well?
For a lot of people, that will be affordable. For many others, it won't. I mean, if you're looking at whether or not you can put on the heating, you're not going to be looking at spending £150 a month on an obesity drug. And that is the inequity of this, and that it is really a 2-tiered access to these drugs. And we know that people who struggle to buy fresh or fresh food, good food, cook it themselves, they're more likely to buy ultra-processed food, they're more likely to be obese, and they're the ones who can't afford to pay for these drugs.
Let's be really straightforward about it. We are talking about those in the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. People with less money in their pockets are more likely to need these drugs, basically.
Absolutely, and that's known, and yet the NHS at the moment isn't able to deliver them at the scale that's needed.
Isn't the whole point of these weight loss drugs that you take them, you lose weight, and you avoid or at least minimise the impact of conditions associated directly with obesity, therefore saving the health service money.
Yes, and it's interesting, when you talk to this pharmacy, they find that 80% of their patients do change their lifestyles. So it's almost like a reset moment. And we shouldn't... At the moment, there is this big divide, isn't there? Are these drugs good or bad? And it's very divisive. Some people say we shouldn't be spending taxpayers' money on these drugs because... people are getting into this mess on their own.
Well, this is the put down the pies and go for a run mob. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, get off your backside. I mean, that's not the science of obesity as we understand it now. That the risk is determined by your genes, and if you live in this environment where there are fast food shops everywhere, we're bombarded with ultra processed food, which is made to be delightful, and we crave it. Then some people are really going to struggle with that. But if you take the cravings out of the equation, change the way people think, the food noise that people with obesity live with day in, day out, it enables them to reset, rethink their diet and so on. And I've spoken to so many people where this is happening, and it is an opportunity for the health service to get people off this treadmill of thinking about where they're going to then get the next hit of food and sort their lives out.
Off the top of my head, I could list you, I would imagine, at least 10 separate conditions that could be directly linked to obesity. So, I'm presuming that there are huge savings potentially for the health service if we target these drugs correctly.
Yeah, heart disease, stroke, cancers, dementia. There are 200 different diseases that are increased by obesity. £6.5 billion a year the NHS spends on treating those diseases.
That's a lot.
It costs the economy, they reckon, about 27 billion through days off sick, productivity and that kind of thing. So finding some solution really is important, and that's why people are looking at these drugs, not just for health, but the government is looking at them for productivity too.
Thomas, thank you. We will be back in just a moment with an obesity campaigner who'll tell us just how much of an impact these drugs have had on her life. Stay put. So, clearly some concerns over who's actually able to access these drugs. So let's speak to someone who has. Sarah Le Brocq lost 8 stone through exercise and diet, yet, as happens with so many people, the weight returned, despite maintaining those good habits.
So I have lived with obesity most of my adult life, experienced the whole trying everything to try and lose weight and maintain my weight loss. I was actually on a weight loss TV show. It was called Fat, the Fight of My Life. And it was one of these transformational weight loss programs where I was filmed for 9 months and I was taken from doing no exercise at all to being given a personal trainer for 2 hours a day. And then at the end of my program, I actually completed an Olympic distance triathlon. So I literally transformed my life. And I thought, this is it. This is going to be the thing that I'm going to skip off into the sunset as a healthier, skinnier version of myself. And the reality was that, yes, I lost 8.5 stone, which was amazing. And obviously was a lot fitter and healthier. But fundamentally, what happened over the next few years was, despite me still running 5 and 10Ks all the time, doing triathlons, my weight started coming back on. So I started digging into the science, because as a scientist, I wanted to kind of see there's got to be more to this, and basically found out that there's something called metabolic adaptation that happens to people that lose a significant amount of weight. And what that is that your body starts making you fight to get that weight back on. It doesn't like it when you lose a significant amount of weight. It feels like it's suddenly unsafe. And the kind of the fat was the protection. It's a bit like fight or flight. So it then tries to get you to regain that weight. So it makes you crave certain foods. It makes you feel colder so that you eat to get warm. It does crazy physiological things, which kind of really blew my mind, because it was kind of so actually, this isn't me doing something wrong. This isn't kind of my fault. This is bigger than that.
So eventually she too bought weight loss drugs and the weight stayed off. She's now an obesity campaigner, advocate, and founder of the charity All About Obesity. She's also a member of the Weight Management Committee of the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. Nice for sure. Sarah, what change did you notice after taking those drugs?
I've lost 6 stone in the time that I've been on the weight loss medications. I just feel like I've got more energy. My goal was, it wasn't really about weight loss. It was about improving my health and removing restrictions from my life. So kind of when you are in a larger body, things like getting on an aeroplane, having to ask for a seatbelt extension, or struggling to tie your shoelaces, or just simple things that people just wouldn't get unless you were living or in the shoes of someone living with obesity. And now, like, I don't need a seatbelt extension. I kind of run up and down stairs without thinking about it. Just feel like I've got a new lease of life, really. So it's definitely improved my kind of mindset around how I feel about myself.
I mean, Thomas Moore was just telling us a second ago, 95% of these drugs are being prescribed privately, 5% through the health service. I mean, through your charity, do you actually know anyone that's gotten hold of these drugs, through prescription on the health service?
No, in the UK, like, I actually don't know anyone that is getting these medications. And this is despite me working with a lot of the obesity clinicians and specialists in this country. They're getting frustrated that they can't prescribe them for their patients that need these medications. So I feel like we're getting into a system where people that can afford them will get them. So, the health will come with wealth. And it's like, that's not the way this should be. The NHS is about obviously giving treatment to all and not kind of discriminating against anyone.
I mean, you are the patient voice on NICE, the kind of the boards ensuring clinical excellence in the health service in England. I mean, in your mind, just how much of a positive step would it be if these weight loss drugs were prescribed significantly more widely through the health service?
It would change so many things, because right now, people living with obesity have kind of felt like there's been no support for them up to now, because there really hasn't. It's been a case of diet and exercise being given as advice, or if you want bariatric surgery, some people were lucky enough to kind of be able to get access to that, but even the numbers of that have been very low. So what these drugs are giving us is an opportunity to support people to improve their health. We're reducing the amount of people that will then go on to have comorbidities such as type 2 diabetes, joint pain, etc., heart cardiovascular situations, and that's going to have obviously a huge impact then on the spending for the NHS kind of longer term. There's the ability to do that now. So kind of let's try and remove these blockers and make that happen.
Still, I suspect the problems for advocates of weight loss drugs like yourself, that there is still this lingering attitude amongst people that if you want to lose weight, there's a simple and easy way to do it. Just eat less, exercise more.
Hugely. I mean, I literally feel like I hit my head against a brick wall most days around that whole eat less, move more kind of conversation. Because it's like, if it was that simple, do you really think that 2/3 of the population would be living with overweight and obesity? Because what you're saying is that they're just choosing to eat the wrong foods and not exercise enough. We know that genetics plays such a huge part in obesity. And then also kind of societal things going on around how much people earn, kind of how active they are in their jobs. So I think we've just got to be realistic here around people are going to be doing sedentary jobs. People are going to be living in obesogenic environments. So how can we manage all of that? And that's where these medications potentially are helping people do that. So it's not a cheating way out. It's not a quick fix. It's not a golden bullet. It's a tool to help us live and survive in this world that we live in and try and be healthier versions of ourselves.
I mean, Sarah, you said earlier that this could potentially be a set of drugs that you may well have to take for the rest of your life. I mean, make the case, if you can, for the provision of such a drug for a full life term being handed out potentially to tens, hundreds of thousands, maybe even at some point millions of people.
Well, we're doing it already for diabetes. We do it for hypertension. And we do it with statins now as well. So I think there's a lot of resistance initially when there's change and people not kind of getting that understanding. And stigma does play a huge part here in the fact that, people seem to have a lot more empathy for people living with diabetes or living with cardiovascular health, for instance, or asthma or other kind of chronic conditions. But actually, we need to look at obesity in the same way that we do those other chronic conditions. No one kind of says, well, why are we paying for insulin for someone for the rest of their lives? We know it's because someone's pancreas isn't working correctly. This is the same with obesity. Their gut hormones aren't working the same as somebody not living with obesity. So these drugs are regulating that to enable them to kind of make different food choices, to live to live a healthier life. And we need to really focus on the science around this rather than this opinion that we have around it can be self-managed, because it really can't. So I think that's the thing for the future is if we treat this now, ultimately reduce the amount of money that we're spending right now on type 2 diabetes, on cancer treatments, on hip and joint issues, etc., and all the other things that we're seeing as a knock-on effect of someone living with obesity.
Sarah, thank you. And you can watch Thomas Moore's full report. Just head to skynews.com. The Daily is back tomorrow.